I used to think the quietest moments in life were the safest. The soft hum of an empty room, the stillness right before sunrise, the breath you take before speaking a truth that might shatter everything. But the quiet moment that changed my life was none of those. It was the sound of my husband zipping his suitcase. My name is Jordyn Ellis. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a hotel receptionist in a small but busy coastal city in Florida. I've lived most of my life believing that calmness was strength, that patience meant understanding, and that the right silence could keep a home together. I didn't know yet that silence can also hide storms. Before today, I had believed that I was married to the love of my life, the one who meant the world to me and my favorite person. If you had told me I would be in this position today, doubting all I had believed about my one true love, Derrick, I probably would have shut you up and wouldn't believe you. But there's a saying in life that things can change in the twinkle of an eye, and I think that is what best describes my life in this moment. I was standing in the doorway of our bedroom, still wearing my hotel receptionist uniform, when Derrick looked at me with a casualness I didn't recognize. Then he said the sentence that cracked the air open. "I'm leaving you for Ariel." No pause, no tremor, not even shame. Just a man announcing a new preference, the way someone switches a TV channel. At first, I felt nothing. No heat, no sting, no rush of tears. Just a strange emptiness that spread through my chest like cold water. I stared at him, at the suitcase, at the drawer he'd left half open, as if he'd been packing for days. As if this moment was rehearsed. He walked past me, brushing my shoulder lightly, almost politely. "It's better this way, Jordyn. We both know it." But I didn't know it. Not until later. I watched him leave our apartment, move down the hallway with a confidence that didn't match the man I once knew. And when the door closed behind him, the silence didn't feel soft anymore. It felt sharp, like it was cutting me open from the inside. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't run after him the way a younger version of me might have. I just stood there, feeling this strange weight of an ending I hadn't agreed to. The world felt suspended. A thin film of dust floated in the afternoon light. A car horn echoed faintly from the street. My name badge, Jordyn E., reflected from the mirror. I remember thinking how small my life suddenly felt. Then, like a whisper meant only for me, another truth surfaced. If he could say those words that easily, it meant he'd been gone long before his suitcase was zipped. And beneath the shock, beneath the numbness, something else stirred. Not anger, not revenge, not yet. Just awareness. I wasn't losing him. I was being freed from a lie. And somewhere deep down, I felt the first flicker of clarity. Quiet, steady, undeniable. This wasn't the end he thought it was. Before I continue my story, let me ask you something. What would you do if someone shattered your life in a single breath? Would you collapse? Or would you rise quietly and make them regret ever underestimating you? Share your honest opinion in the comments down below. I truly want to hear your perspective.
Before everything unraveled, my life looked ordinary from the outside, comfortably predictable, maybe even quiet to a fault. But in those days, I believed stability was something you built piece by piece, with small routines and gentle compromises. I thought that was what marriage was supposed to be, a series of shared choices, many of them unspoken, all of them intentional. My morning started before sunrise. While the city was still half asleep, I brewed weak coffee in a chipped mug, slipped into my receptionist uniform, and walked the 4 blocks to the hotel where I worked. The streets were cool at that hour, washed with the pale blue of early dawn. I liked that part of the day, the feeling that the world hadn't yet demanded anything from me. My job wasn't glamorous, but it grounded me. There was something calming about repetitive tasks, checking reservations, answering calls, greeting travelers with polite smiles. I was good at remembering details, names, room numbers, guest preferences. People said I had the kind of presence that made others feel safe. I held on to that quietly, the way some people hold on to secret talents. When I'd come home each evening, Derrick would usually be in the living room, scrolling through his phone or half watching a sports broadcast. He liked excitement, adrenaline, the rush of a successful pitch. When we first met, that energy drew me in. It made me feel like I was stepping into a life brighter than my own. But the truth? Over the years, the brightness faded into something else, something colder, something that asked for more of me than it ever returned. I didn't see the shift happening in real time. It crept in slowly, like shadows lengthening in a room where the sun is setting. A forgotten anniversary here, a phone left face down on the table a little too often, work trips that didn't match his company calendar. I had questions, but I learned not to ask them too loudly. Derrick didn't like being confronted. It made him defensive, irritated, almost offended that I dared disrupt his comfort. So I learned silence. I convinced myself it was maturity, or grace, or partnership. I didn't know then that it was survival. Our apartment was modest. 2 bedrooms, beige walls, a balcony with a view of the adjacent building's brick exterior. We'd talked about moving somewhere bigger someday. We even started saving for a house. I thought the joint savings account was a symbol of our shared future. I didn't know it would become the battlefield for everything that followed. Still, despite the cracks, I held on to hope. I held on to us. I believed that if I worked harder, loved better, stayed patient, he'd eventually meet me halfway. I told myself he was just stressed, that every relationship had phases, that we were still building something worth protecting. Looking back now, I can see I was the only one doing the building. Derrick lived in a world that revolved around him, his job, his image, his desires. He bought expensive shoes while I stretched every grocery budget. He upgraded his phone annually while I made do with a cracked screen. I told myself these imbalances were temporary, that they didn't mean anything about his love for me. But love is measured in attention. And his attention was drifting long before I understood who it was drifting toward. Her name, Ariel, entered my life months before the suitcase ever did. I didn't know she existed yet, but I felt the shift in him. He became more distracted, more irritable when I asked simple things. He started guarding his phone like it contained secret states. He stayed late for work 3 nights a week. On weekends, he claimed he needed space, alone time, mental recharge. The signs were there. I saw them all. I just wasn't ready to accept them. Even those months, while the foundation of our marriage was quietly crumbling, I poured myself into routines that made me feel like I still had control. I journaled every night, small notes, lists, observations. It was a habit I'd carried since childhood. Writing helped me understand myself, helped me process. I didn't realize then that those journals would become evidence, threads of truth I'd later follow to uncover his lies. My closest confidant during that period was my manager at the hotel, Mr. Reeve. He was in his late 60s, gentle, perceptive, the kind of man who could read tension in a person before they ever spoke. He'd ask me sometimes, "Everything all right at home, Jordyn?" And I would smile, a small, automatic smile, and say, "Yes, just tired." He didn't push, but I think he knew. My world before the betrayal wasn't perfect, but it was familiar. And sometimes familiarity feels like safety. You cling to it, even when it stops serving you, even when it begins to hurt you. I wasn't ready to face the truth then, but the truth was already coming for me. Relentless, undeniable, waiting for the moment I could no longer look away. I just didn't know how close that moment was.
Betrayal doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it slips into the room quietly, sits in the corner, and waits for you to finally look it in the eye. Mine revealed itself the night I realized Derrick wasn't just distant, he was already gone. It started with something small, a forgotten dinner. He told me he'd be home by 7, so I cooked simple pasta with roasted vegetables, the kind he used to say he loved. By 8, the food was cold. By 9, I was sitting at the dining table alone, my phone face up, watching the minutes deepen into disappointment. When he finally walked in, close to midnight, he smelled faintly of cologne I didn't recognize. I had already. He brushed past me. No apology, no explanation. I went to bed before he finished showering. I told myself it was only fatigue that made his tone sharp, that made his eyes unfocused when he looked at me. But inside, something was shifting, settling into a shape I didn't have the courage to examine. The betrayal became harder to ignore in the weeks that followed. His late nights became routine. His phone stayed on silent. He started dressing differently. Crisp shirts, expensive cologne, a new watch he claimed was a gift from a coworker. He seemed more alive out there than he ever was at home. One night, I woke to the sound of his phone vibrating on the dresser. The screen lit up with a name I didn't know at the time. Ariel. The message preview showed just 3 words. Same time tomorrow? My breath caught. Not loudly, but sharply enough that I felt it echo inside my chest. I reached for the phone without touching it, hovering my hand inches above the screen. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Those 3 words paired with the hour, 2:13 a.m., told me everything my heart had been avoiding. I lay back in bed slowly, staring at the ceiling, feeling the room close in. The shadows seemed heavier that night. I could hear his breathing beside me, steady, peaceful, like he hadn't just broken something sacred, like he hadn't left me awake in the dark with a truth I wasn't prepared for. The next morning, I didn't confront him. Not yet. I wanted to understand what I was up against. I wanted clarity, not chaos. So I watched him as he dressed, as he adjusted his hair in the mirror, as he smiled at himself and a reflection I hadn't seen directed at me in months. "You're up early," he said casually. I nodded. Just couldn't sleep. He didn't ask why. He didn't look deeper. He just grabbed his keys and left, humming under his breath. That was the moment I realized he wasn't just distracted. He was living a second life, and I was a ghost hunting the first. Days passed, and the distance grew louder. He stopped kissing me goodnight, stopped asking about my day, stopped noticing when I wasn't okay. It was as if I'd become background noise, familiar enough to ignore, quiet enough to forget. Then came the day he slipped. It was a Saturday afternoon. He was in the living room, scrolling through his phone, when he laughed. Actually laughed, a sound I hadn't heard from him in months. His guard dropped for a second, just long enough for me to glimpse his screen when he stood to grab a drink from the kitchen. There she was, Ariel, smiling in a photo he saved, her hair bright, her makeup perfect, her expression soft in a way he once described me. Under the photo was a message, "Miss you already." My stomach twisted, my throat tightened. I forced myself to stay still, to keep breathing, to not let the pain show. I didn't want him to see the crack forming. I didn't want him to know that I knew. He returned with his drink, caught me glancing at his phone, and casually tilted the screen away. Without guilt, without hesitation, as if hiding things had become second nature. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine." The lie tasted metallic. That night when he fell asleep, I sat at the edge of the bed and looked at him. Really looked at him. His face was peaceful, almost innocent. But innocence doesn't hide phones. Innocence doesn't whisper another woman's name in the dark. Innocence doesn't forget the person sleeping 3 feet away. I whispered a question into the silence, one he couldn't hear. When did I stop being enough for you? The room didn't answer.
The betrayal became undeniable 4 days later, when he didn't come home at all. No call, no message, just silence. He returned the next morning, smelling of the same unfamiliar cologne, wearing last night's clothes. "I stayed at a friend's," he said flatly. "Which friend?" "Don't start, Jordyn. You know how I hate interrogations." I felt something inside me harden, quietly, almost gently, like the click of a lock turning from the inside. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't begging. I was waking up. And 4 days after that, he zipped the suitcase.
I've replayed the moment of discovery so many times in my head that it almost feels like a movie I watched too many times, each detail sharp enough to cut. But the truth is, it didn't unfold in a dramatic explosion. It was slow, quiet, like a sickness that settles in long before you know you're sick. It began 3 days after that dinner, the one where Derrick asked for the divorce. I hadn't slept much since then. My mind kept cycling through every conversation, every late-night phone call he claimed was work, every missed date, every cold shoulder he blamed on stress. I could feel that something deeper had been wrong long before he finally said the words out loud. But knowing something is wrong and seeing it are two different things. It was a Wednesday morning, early enough that the sun was barely coloring the sky. I was sitting at my little breakfast table,
untouched tea in front of me, trying to gather strength to face the day. That was when my phone buzzed. An alert from the bank, a notification from our joint account. A large withdrawal request had been made. My heart didn't race, didn't panic. It simply dropped, like a coin falling to the bottom of a well. For weeks, Derrick had been making little passive-aggressive jokes. "You're lucky I keep everything together. I hope you'd manage if anything happened to me. You don't really handle the finances, so..." He'd been preparing me to feel helpless. Maybe he thought I'd roll over. Maybe he assumed that because he was walking out, he could walk out with whatever he wanted. But that morning, the alert wasn't just a warning, it was a spark. I opened the banking app with fingers that refused to steady. A request to transfer half the account into a separate savings, his savings, was pending. He did it at 4:17 a.m. He thought I was asleep. He thought I would never check. He thought he still had control. I stared at the screen for a long time before I realized the anger rising in me wasn't frantic. It was focused. But this wasn't a discovery. Not yet. It merely pushed me closer. The real discovery came 2 hours later, when I logged into my email for work. There it was, a forwarded message I wasn't meant to see. He had accidentally sent it from the shared account we used for bills. The subject line was short, smug, and sickening. "Final stretch, babe. The house will be ours by Friday. From Ariel." I clicked the thread. Each message hit like a slap. They weren't just planning to be together, they were planning to build a life with our money. Derrick had been using me as a financial stepping stone, draining resources, leveraging my good credit, and funneling funds to help him buy a beach house with her. A woman I barely knew existed. A woman he'd chosen over me long before he confessed. A woman he'd been promising luxury, promising comfort, promising a future, using assets tied to my name. Every sent screenshot, every forwarded bank statement, every careless message made it clear they believed I was powerless. They believed I'd fold. They believed I'd walk away quietly. They didn't even consider the possibility that I would fight. My eyes burned as I read Derrick's words to her. "Once I move everything out of the joint account, she'll realize she can't survive without me. She'll have no choice but to accept whatever settlement I offer." Whatever settlement he offer. He really did think I was weak. As the anger built, something else rose with it. Clarity. Cold, steady clarity. The kind that reshapes a person from the inside out.
I clicked through more messages, more attachments, more proof of betrayal woven into financial manipulation and emotional cruelty. It wasn't just infidelity, it was strategy, a long, calculated dismantling of my stability. A betrayal that wasn't impulsive, but architectural. Derrick wasn't leaving me for love. He was leaving me for leverage. And he assumed I wouldn't discover the depth of his plan until it was too late. But life is strange. Sometimes discovery arrives in the most mundane ways. In misdirected emails, in digital crumbs careless people leave behind, in the arrogance that makes betrayers sloppy. I leaned back in my chair and felt something inside me shift. My breathing slowed. My heartbeat steadied. The panic evaporated like steam leaving a cooling kettle. This wasn't devastation. This was information. Information I could use. By the time I closed the email, I knew two things with absolute certainty. First, Derrick had underestimated me. Second, he was going to regret that. I stood, walked to the window, and watched the sunrise bloom across the sky. For the first time in days, the beauty of it didn't hurt. It felt like a beginning, a quiet, powerful beginning. I whispered to myself, "You thought you controlled the story, but you don't." And at that moment, something inside me locked into place. Not rage, not grief, resolve. The discovery didn't break me, it awakened me. And once I'm awake, I don't fall back asleep. Because the truth wasn't just that Derrick betrayed me. The truth was that Derrick believed I'd never discover who he really was. He was wrong, and he was about to learn how expensive that mistake would become. After the discovery, the first hours felt surreal. I sat at my small kitchen table, staring at the glowing screen, the evidence scattered across my laptop and phone. Betrayal had been delivered with precision, but so could my response. The clarity that came with it wasn't loud or frenzied. It was quiet, steady, and methodical. I realized revenge isn't about spectacle. It's about strategy, about waiting for the moment when every piece falls exactly into place. I started by gathering information. Every message, every email, every bank notification was logged, dated, and stored in a digital folder I labeled Truth. My journals became extensions of this folder. Every note I had ever written about him, every thought about our finances, our plans, our shared life, it suddenly felt like evidence. I documented every interaction, every inconsistency, every suspicious behavior. Nothing would be left to chance. I spoke to Mr. Reeve, my former hotel manager and mentor, who had always been a quiet observer of my life. Derrick's meticulous, but meticulous people leave patterns, he said. And I remembered he nodded, reminding me that small, consistent behaviors can reveal even the cleverest deceptions. He offered his quiet guidance, helping me organize my notes and identify the key leverage points. Next, I consulted Sonia Patel, a divorce attorney with a reputation for exposing financial misconduct. I explained what I had uncovered, the joint account, the withdrawals, the messages. Sonia listened calmly, jotting notes in her leather-bound notebook. "He's careless," she said finally. "People who think others won't notice are the most vulnerable. There's a way to protect your share and make him accountable." Her words were a quiet affirmation. This could be done. I also reviewed the joint account in detail. Derrick had assumed he could move money freely, assuming I would be paralyzed with shock. He didn't consider that I had studied every bank statement, memorized thresholds, and understood the system better than he imagined. I marked key dates, transfer limits, and points of vulnerability. Every potential move he could make to access the money was mapped, accounted for, neutralized in my mind. At home, I created a small war room. A corner of the living room became my command center. Laptop, journals, spreadsheets, copies of emails, sticky notes mapping the timeline of his deceit. The space felt charged but calm. I spent hours cross-referencing, making sure every fact was verifiable, every document traceable. Precision was more satisfying than emotion. Calmness, more powerful than anger. I rehearsed scenarios in my head. What if he tried to buy the beach house? What if he confronted me? What if Ariel pressed him for funds? Each outcome was considered, plotted, and accounted for. I wrote contingency plans, alternatives, backup strategies. My mind became a chessboard. Every piece represented leverage I held. By the end of the week, I had a comprehensive plan. I would secure the funds legally, prevent him from accessing anything without my consent, and ensure that any attempts to manipulate the system against me would fail. I would remain composed, measured, and invisible while each of my actions built toward the ultimate payoff. This was not about humiliation. It was about balance, about correcting a system he had exploited. I looked out the window at the pale afternoon light filtering into our apartment. The plan was set. The pieces were in place. All that remained was execution. If you're drawn to stories where calm turns to power, stay with us. Subscribe to Revenge Bible for more tales of justice served quietly. And just like that, the waiting game began. But it was a waiting with intention. A waiting where every thought, every document, every action contributed to a crescendo he would never see coming. I wasn't just planning revenge. I was planning justice. And in the quiet, I felt an unshakable sense of control I hadn't felt in years. Because for the first time since the betrayal, I was no longer the victim. I was the strategist. I was the storm he didn't see coming.
Revenge didn't arrive with raised voices or chaos. It arrived quietly, on a Thursday morning, with the same stillness that had carried me through the planning. Calmness had become my sharpest weapon, precision my shield, and timing, perfect, deliberate timing, became the heartbeat of everything that followed. Derrick believed he had the advantage. He believed he could drain our joint account at any moment, redirect the funds to his private account, and use them to buy the beach house he and Ariel had been daydreaming about. He believed I was stunned into helplessness, that I was somewhere crying over heartbreak, too overwhelmed to think clearly. He did not know that the first step of my plan had already been executed days earlier. I walked into the bank that morning, just after it opened, wearing a simple navy dress and a calm expression. The manager, Mr. Lowell, recognized me from previous visits and invited me into his office. I presented the printed emails, the time-stamped requests, the evidence of Derrick's attempted manipulation. Sonia, my attorney, had guided me on exactly what to say, what to ask, and what legal rights I had. "I'd like to freeze the joint account temporarily," I said, sliding the documents across the desk. "I have strong reason to believe my husband is attempting to misuse shared funds without my consent." Mr. Lowell read the emails slowly, eyes narrowing with quiet disapproval. "This is significant," he murmured. "Yes," I said, "and I'm requesting a freeze until both parties can be present." With the documentation supporting my claim, the bank approved the freeze. What Derrick thought was his playground would become his trap. The moment the freeze was processed, I made the second move, transferring my rightful half of the funds into a separate account in my name only, all fully documented, all fully legal, all fully protected. Derrick's money grab had turned into an empty gesture. That afternoon, I received the first ripple of the impact, a furious text from Derrick. "Why can't I access the account? What did you do?" I didn't respond. Silence was more powerful than explanation. 2 hours later, another message arrived. "I need those funds for something important. Release the freeze, Jordyn." Still, I said nothing. Silence forced him to confront himself. But the true strike came the next morning. At 9:14 a.m., my phone buzzed with an email alert. "Your joint applicant attempted a withdrawal from a frozen account." 5 minutes later, Derrick called. He didn't start with hello. He started with panic. "Jordyn, what's going on?
I need access to that money. This is serious." His voice was tight, desperate, not for me, but for what he had lost. I spoke softly, evenly. "You attempted to move funds without my consent. The bank saw it. They froze it. That's all. You had no right, and you did?"
The silence that followed was more revealing than anything he could have said. Ariel must have been feeding him pressure from the background because he snapped next. "You're ruining everything. We put a down payment on a property. I need that money. Today." There it was, the confession. Clear and undeniable. "I've already withdrawn my legal half, and the rest is frozen pending review." "You can't do this. I need that money." "You wanted that money," I corrected, "but need, no. You never needed me, remember? You were leaving." The next sound was a brittle exhale, anger mixing with fear. I ended the call. Afterward, I met with Sonia to finalize the separation of our finances. While Derrick scrambled, I quietly filed every document needed to protect my assets and expose his misconduct during divorce proceedings. But the final stage of my revenge was not financial. It was informational. Ariel had been benefiting from his manipulation, fully aware of the money he planned to steal from the marriage. She had enjoyed his arrogance, his promises, his illusions of power, but she didn't know the full truth, that the beach house dream had been built on lies and fraudulent intentions. I forwarded her a single email thread, the one where Derrick detailed his plan to leave me stranded financially. I said nothing else. No commentary. No accusation. Just the truth. An hour later, Derrick called again. This time, his voice was shaky. "Why would you send that to her?" he demanded. "She deserved to know," I simply replied. He inhaled sharply, like someone trying not to drown. "You're trying to destroy my life." "I'm not destroying anything. I'm revealing what you built." By evening, the unraveling was complete. Ariel stopped responding to him. The beach house sellers rejected his offer due to insufficient funds, and the bank initiated an investigation into his attempted misuse of joint assets. And Derrick, who had walked out of our marriage so confidently, so sure of his superiority, found himself scrambling in the ruins of his own arrogance. My revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. It was balanced, measured, honest. And watching the truth dismantle his fantasy was not a moment of triumph. It was a moment of closure. He had chosen betrayal. I had chosen justice. And justice, unlike him, did not fail me.
Betrayal leaves a wound, but it does not have the final say. I've learned that the end of trust is not the end of life. The end of love is not the end of hope. In the end that someone else tries to write for you, whether an unfaithful spouse, a manipulative partner, or a selfish betrayer, does not have to become your story. After the dust settled, I spent days in reflection, piecing together not only what had happened, but who I had been through it. Betrayal had forced me to confront a truth I'd long ignored, that my strength was always there, quietly waiting for me to recognize it. Revenge became my instrument not of cruelty, but of empowerment. It was proof that I could rise from manipulation and deceit with composure, with strategy, and with dignity intact. I discovered something crucial. Revenge isn't simply about making someone pay, it's about reclaiming control over your life when it has been threatened, when it has been stolen. It's about turning humiliation into power, weakness into clarity, and loss into liberation. Every calculated step I took to protect my finances, expose the lies, and ensure justice was served quietly reinforced something far more lasting: my own confidence, my own resilience. The process wasn't instantaneous. There were moments of doubt, nights when grief threatened to suffocate me, hours when fear whispered that the betrayal had won. But I held on to the principle that the story of my life would not be written by someone else's recklessness or arrogance. I reminded myself that endings are only endings if you allow them to be. And with every measured action, with every quiet victory, I felt my future reclaim itself piece by piece. Now, months later, I wake each day with a sense of peace I haven't known in years. I've reclaimed my independence, my finances, and my sense of self. The apartment, the savings, the quiet moments of reflection, they are no longer reminders of loss, but symbols of triumph. The name Derrick, once dismissed, is now a footnote in my history, a lesson in recognizing deceit and protecting my worth. And here I am, Jordyn Ellis, finally free. Yet in this freedom, I've reclaimed something even more intimate: my identity. My maiden name, once tucked away in old documents and childhood memories, is back. I am Jordyn Monroe once again, a woman who has faced betrayal, outmaneuvered deception, and risen stronger than ever before. To anyone listening, remember this: the betrayal you suffer today is not the story's end. The oppressor does not get to dictate your conclusion. You can reclaim control, rise with dignity, and transform the pain into purpose. Revenge, when executed with calm and clarity, can illuminate your own strength rather than simply punish another. I have lived it. I have felt it. I have emerged from it whole, and so can you. Here at Revenge Bible, we turn pain into purpose and betrayal into balance. Subscribe and join us for the next transformation.